like, this is probably the only time I've ever sat in a movie theater and just had like this reaction where I was just like this gut-wrenching reaction. And it was The Last Jedi when Luke gets that lightsaber and throws it over his shoulder. I would have to say that is, I would say, maybe say it was probably the worst scene in the history of Star Wars.
Hi, and welcome to 5 Random Questions, the show where every question is an adventure. I'm your host, Danny Brown, and each week I'll be asking my guest 5 questions created by a random question generator. The guest has no idea what the questions are, and neither do I, which means this could go either way. So sit back, relax, and let's dive into this week's episode. Today's guest is Tim Truax. Tim began his podcast journey in 2015 as he turned his passion for pop culture, Star Wars and Marvel, into his first podcast called The Nerd Room. As the host, producer and editor of The Nerd Room, Tim's refined his podcasting skill sets as a pop culture commentator across over 450 episodes. Since launching The Nerd Room, he's seen many big changes to the podcast industry, giving him a unique insight into the past, present and future of podcasting. Tim is also the CEO of PodSummit, one of Canada's leading podcasting events, and is focused on delivering unparalleled podcast events in Canada. So, Tim, quite the bio there, mate. Welcome to 5 Random Questions.
Danny, my friend, thank you so much for having me. I'm jacked up. I'm excited. Coming off a bit of a cold, so my voice is a bit nasally here, but nonetheless, I'm excited here just to chat with you first of all, and to get into some of these questions too.
Well, yeah, I feel your voice might be one of these like sexy voices that people get attracted to. You know, you've got like a cold or an illness or something, you get that husky voice. It's nothing like your normal one, and then your wife hopefully goes, "Oh, you should stay like that." And Tim, I mentioned you're the CEO of PodSummit, and that the inaugural event was last year. So tell us a little bit about that and how that came about, mate.
Yeah, well, it's one of those things that sometimes in life things happen when you kind of least expect them. So like you mentioned there, I've been podcasting this is my 10th year of podcasting, 2025 here. I've been doing it since 15. And it was always based around pop culture, Star Wars, Marvel, DC, and providing that fan commentary. And I always did it as a creative release, as a way to allow myself to do something a little bit different that I don't have really any experience in. Like, I'm not an audio editor. I was never had any interest in kind of the creative space until I started doing this. And it was really based around that podcast, or my current podcast was based around creating a community around pop culture, around these things that I love, because I wanted to talk about Star Wars and Marvel more consistently with friends and with a community. And so we started doing that. I had a blast at doing it. I discovered the medium and I loved it. I felt it was something that was, at that time, it was quite popular in the pop culture space, the Star Wars space and all that, 15, 16, as The Force Awakens, the Marvel movies were really kind of coming out and becoming part of that big zeitgeist of the general audience even. And so we had a lot of success there. And just a couple of years ago, and this is where the pop culture podcasting and PodSummit thing kind of intersect. A couple of years ago, I ran the podcast stage at the Calgary Comic and Entertainment Expo, which is the Comic-Con of Calgary, basically. And through that, I linked up with an individual that actually used to own PodSummit, and they ran events in Calgary and Edmonton for 2 or 3 years prior to the pandemic. And coming out of the pandemic, he said, I'm not really into this anymore. And I said, I'd love to buy this off of you. And so we effectively bought all the intangibles, the website, the name, the logo, and all that stuff. And my wife and I relaunched it as a full incorporated business. And what we wanted to do was effectively create a large-scale podcasting event for podcasters, for creators, for industry, for anyone looking to explore the world of podcasting. We want to create an event for them that had the sessions, the panels, the live podcast, but also the networking opportunities. We wanted it to be a way to bring together the hobbyists, the enthusiasts with the industry folk as well. And so that's what we're really concentrating on. And I was honored to have you out here with the first one. We recorded a podcast with you. You came all the way out here to Calgary, and we had an absolute blast. And the success of it was just something that we couldn't have imagined. And we're really looking forward to getting into it again this year.
And as you mentioned, as someone that attended last year at the inaugural one, I can agree, I can attest. It was an amazing event and really, really well put together and great learning for everybody. And you mentioned it, obviously, it was part of your pop culture background with the podcast that kind of meshed with that as well. And I don't know if it's just me, but it seems that a lot of podcasters have a strong affiliation with nerd culture. I know my colleagues at Captivate, for example, Mark and Gary.
Yes.
They've got a co-hosted Star Wars podcast. Gary's got his own Doctor Who podcast. Obviously, you've got the Nerd Room. I've got like The Mandalorian, a little sort of cut out of there in the back of my sort of recording area here. What do you think it is about podcasters, indie podcasters, that seems to alleviate towards, the nerd culture?
I think it has a lot to do with just the way that we kind of see the world as this, not so much a fantasy, but we're looking at things like Jurassic Park or Star Wars, whatever, and we're kind of out in that arena where I think a lot of the creative juices are flowing. And you look at what is being put to screen and what we kind of love about that. There's a lot of, I would say, kind of creative emphasis on the acceptance of what you're watching. You just kind of immerse yourself into that franchise, into that movie, and you have the ability to kind of veer off and almost have that, nostalgia or child-esque sort of appreciation for what's going on. And I think that translates really well into podcasting because, and maybe even the independent side of podcasting, because, we grow up loving and watching these stories evolve. And I always view podcasting as a storytelling medium. And I think that linkage between the love and passion for pop culture has a lot to do with the love and passion for the storytelling aspects of it, the whimsical elements of Star Wars or Ninja Turtles or anything like that. And I think that translates really well into the podcast space because it's about the same similar thing, right? It's telling a story, it's evolving inside of that space. And I think too, especially as like grown-ass men that love this stuff, I find that you also have this acceptance of who you are. And I think that's really important for a podcasting host is understanding who you are, because I think that allows you to ask if you're interviewing or answer if you're being interviewed questions just at face value. You're not really hiding anything if you're fully, like I have this room that I'm sitting in right now is absolutely full of action figures and memorabilia and all this stuff. And I'm very cool and accepting and very open about that aspect of me. 10 years ago, that might not have been the same case, but I think that element of it too really influences the ability to have a great conversation because you're just willing to be open and kind of just have those experiences with people.
Well, I think that leads nicely into being open and getting experiences with people. Let's get you being open about 5 questions on this episode. Are we ready for the 5 random questions?
Absolutely. I'm a little nervous, but let's do it.
All right. Let me bring up the random question generator. Okay, here we go. Question number 1. What's one place you've traveled that you never want to go back to?
Ooh, it's a tough one because it's funny because a lot of places I've gone is, of course, by choice. And it's got to be somewhere that, okay, here, I got one here. So I used to travel to, and this, I don't want to make anyone feel bad that's listening to this, but I used to go down to Houston, Texas a lot. And I love the atmosphere of Texas, and especially when you get up to Austin and Dallas and stuff. But I can honestly say that I don't love the city of Houston. I just find it very hot, as a Canadian. We used to go down there in the summer a lot with work. And I find too that it's a very kind of, it's just unappealing city to me. I don't know what it is. And I feel really bad saying that because there's some amazing people that I know down in Houston. But if I had to pick one place that I've been that I would probably never go back to, it might be Houston. But like I'm going to Dallas in a couple of months, and Austin, Texas is great, San Antonio. But yeah, that's kind of a tough one because now I kind of feel bad for saying it.
Well, we can always bleep out the name of the city. There'll be a few bleeps there. So when you mention it's like unappealing, is that maybe the architectures, the layout? I know you mentioned obviously the heat, and I get you there. I'm far more a person and prefers the winter, the cooler temperatures. I can't do muggy, humid heats, so I completely get you. So, but for me, for Toronto, for example, I find Toronto a very unappealing city. Lovely people and some amazing architecture, but as a city to walk about and stuff, I find it unappealing. So I don't know, is that maybe something with Houston or?
Absolutely. The traffic is horrendous there. And they have this weird thing, and this is again me from the outside looking into it, where there's no public transit, and it's all kind of road lobbyists, and so there's just these winding, humongous roads. You can't walk anywhere. It's not a city built for walking unless maybe you're downtown, and so it's just all those elements, and then you mix that in, like I said, with the heat, and kind of the AC of it all. But at the same time, there's lots of people that live down there that I know that have these wonderfully humongous houses with pools and all these amazing things that are just unaffordable in Canada. And maybe so it's kind of maybe a little bit of the balance, but I have to say it's a lot of concrete, a lot of driving, a lot of time sitting in cars, and yeah, I don't. And maybe to be honest with you, it's just the frequency that I was down there. I used to go down there every 4 to 6 weeks for 2 or 3 years at a stretch there, and it just became maybe too familiar, and it was just always associated with this flight from Calgary that's just about 4 hours, so it's just over a movie, and it's kind of just in that annoying window of flight where you can't really get a good sleep, you can't just watch a movie and be there. And it was just one of those things that, and at times too, I had a young family when I was doing a lot of traveling with work. And so maybe that factors into it where, I was having to leave them a lot and go down to Houston for 2-3 times, or 2-3 days at a time. And so there might be external factors too that have influenced my thoughts and maybe the frequency of travel there. Like I said, I've only been to San Antonio once, Dallas once, Austin once, and I love those cities. And so it could just be the repetitive nature of Houston layered on top with some of the traffic elements and the like I said, keep coming back to this as a Canadian that's sitting in minus 20-degree weather right now. The heat, I'd love maybe the heat right now. My wife would probably kill me for saying that, but it's just I just can't do it down there.
No, I get it. Like I say, I find Toronto probably for similar reasons. I find it very much a concrete city now. And I know a lot of, I've only been in Canada 20 years now, almost 20 years. And I know a lot of Canadians that have been here a lot longer said the landscape, or the city skyline, I should say, the cityscape of Toronto is changed beyond recognition with all the condos, etc. And that's one of the things I liked about Calgary. That was the first time I'd been to Calgary. And I found that really pleasant because of the way the roads and the blocks are all laid out. It was a pleasant walk to get from the hotel to the event place, etc., and back down. And then that whole, where the tower is, that whole area down there, it's almost like a city, not like an old style, an old school kind of shopping area, but it was like a nice, relaxed kind of shopping area. It was nice. So yeah, I completely get it. So there you go, listeners. If you're from Houston and you want to put Tim right, next time he's over in Houston, I'm sure reach out to him and say, okay, we'll show you the good places.
Yeah, maybe I just need that. Maybe I need a better tour guide.
We shall try and arrange that for you. All right, so there we go. Houston at the moment, not the fact that it's just a horrible, horrible place, just like, the frequency. That's what we're going to go for. So let's have a look at question number 2. Okay, maybe this is tied to your first one, Tim. Question number 2. What's on your bucket list this year? And you're not allowed to say not go back to Houston, because then you'll really start an international situation.
Okay, well, bucket list. I love this kind of stuff because I'm a big fan of kind of the manifestation space, putting, I guess, obstacles and even goals in front of yourself, but not being so explicit about them. This year, when we did, my wife and I always sit down and we kind of look through, okay, what are our objectives for 2025? What are our objectives for this year? And this year I kind of laid a few things out that I really wanted to accomplish. But instead of saying it's 1, 2, 3, I decided to kind of frame things up around a couple of words. One of them being legacy, the second one being my relationships. And I just wanted to build kind of this platform for myself to not set myself up for failure in a sense, because, as most things go, those goals and New Year's resolutions always kind of come falling down. But I do have one thing on my bucket list that stands head and shoulders above everything else. So I'm going to rewind a little bit to the pandemic. So April 2020, my family and I were supposed to go on a Disney cruise. And that was in Orlando, and it was in April of 2020. And so we were meant to fly down to Orlando, go to Disney World. And at this point, there's a new extension of one of the parks called Galaxy's Edge. So this is the new Star Wars part of all of it. They have this humongous new area with the Millennium Falcon and all these rides and all that. So we're supposed to go down to that. It had opened, I think, in 2019. And of course, April 2020 arrives. We're like, oh, the pandemic will be over before our cruise is meant to set sail. Like we thought, okay, it'd be 2 weeks. Everyone will get it and we'll be fine. Well, that, of course, didn't turn out to be the case. And it was 2 years or 3 years or whatever it was. And so I didn't get to go down to Galaxy's Edge. And I guess a couple years before that, even, I was meant to, so in 2019 or 18, I was meant to go down to Star Wars Celebration and also go to Galaxy's Edge there. But my second child was born like 2 weeks before that. And so I was unable to go to Galaxy's Edge then. We had another trip planned in 2022 to go down to Star Wars Celebration in California this time and go to Galaxy's Edge then. That didn't plan out because the pandemic and just life happened. And so this year, coming up in April, my family and I, we're going back down to Disneyland in Anaheim. And I am finally going to get to go to Galaxy's Edge. My mother's been there. My sisters, neither of them are Star Wars fans, but my sister's been there. I have tons of friends that have been there. I am like one of the biggest Star Wars fans you'll find, and I've yet to experience this, even though I've actually been in and around the area several times, but just never gone. And so that is my bucket list item for this year, is going to Galaxy's Edge at Disneyland in California.
Nice. And it may have been, maybe like a blessing in disguise. I know after it first opened, and it may be because there was like issues because of the pandemic, obviously. But it had some teething problems, and I'd heard that there were, some of the rides didn't work properly, and the lineups weren't great, or the experience wasn't great. But like I say, I mean, that may have been a lot of that could have been down to the pandemic and all the surrounding issues with that. So I've heard it's like meant to be amazing, and in any videos I see online, the characters that they get playing the main roles, like the Rey, etc., look and sound great, So it should be an experience. And the Star Wars celebration, is that the one in Anaheim?
Yeah, so this year it's in Japan. We're actually thinking about going to, because there's a Disneyland and Disney Sea in Japan, and actually one of my co-hosts on the Nerd Room, he lives in Japan. And so we were thinking about going there, but again, just didn't pan out. My brother-in-law's getting married, life again. But this one just seemed to, like you said, there may be, and I'm a believer in this too, that things happen for a reason. There's a reason I didn't go, and I've avoided for like 5 years watching videos. I've seen the Falcon, I've seen a few things, I've seen some character stuff, but I've never seen pictures of or videos of the rides. I've very much stayed away from that, and so it's been one of those things that's been a top of mind for me for so long, and I can't wait to just go and have blue milk at the bar there and just sit and bask in the glory of I think it's called Batu is what the planet's called that it's based around. And so I just can't wait for that.
No, it sounds awesome. I know many years ago I went to Euro Disney in Paris.
I've been there, yeah.
A couple of years after it opened, I think, and they have a Star Wars ride there. Can't remember what it's called. And you went on like a shuttle. So it was like a
Star Tours, it's called.
Yeah, Star Tours. There you go.
Yeah.
And that was amazing. You go through the asteroid belt, you get chased by tides and all that. So really good. So I can imagine what it'd be like being part of the Falcon ride or whatever, right?
Yes. Oh, it's going to be so good. I can't wait. And I know Mark's a big Star Wars fan, and it's gonna be something, and for me, like that Star Tours ride is just one of my favorite of all time. There's one in Disney World, there's one in Disneyland. They're all over the place, and it's just a classic ride. And then one of those rides that they continuously update too. It's your experience every time you go on it. Although the ride's the same, the experience is different, which is really cool.
Yeah, and I'm sure they must update it with different scenes from like.
Yeah, I think there's like 5 or 6 different scenes. Like even as the new movies came out, they updated them, but I think there's like 6 or different scenarios that you can jump into. And so even your experience, if you go back to back, is likely to be different.
Now, before we move on, I have to ask you as a fellow Star Wars fan, what did you think of Skeleton Crew?
I loved it. I thought it was just brilliant. Like, as a fan of things like Goonies and Stranger Things and that 80s-esque sort of childhood, coming of age, adventure, pirates, like this show, it had all of those elements worked in, but inside of the Star Wars universe, it felt fresh. It felt new. Jude Law was awesome in the show. The kids, sometimes I go back and forth with my love for kids inside of roles like that, because I think it takes a very specific type of kid to be able to kind of carry a show. And so I was always really concerned going in about that, but all those kids were phenomenal. And Neil, the little elephant dude, man, that kid was the best. I it's probably outside of maybe Andor and a couple of the Mandalorian seasons, like Skeleton Crew is like, for me, riding up there amongst the best that they've ever put out.
Yeah, it's funny. A lot of people were hyping up and expecting The Acolyte to be the big TV show this year. And then obviously that was disappointing.
Yeah.
But yeah, Skeleton Crew just came out of nowhere and I loved it, mate. Like you say, it was fresh. And I think the fact that there was no canon characters there, so to speak, kept it, interesting and made it something you just like lose yourself in and enjoy.
Yeah, it was really about the characters and the story more so than it was about Star Wars. Like I always call it the iconography of Star Wars, where you have to have the stormtroopers and you have to have, the X-Wings, which some of those elements were in there. Like you have to make it feel like you're inside of Star Wars, but this really let the story take the front seat. And I think that's the same case with like Andor and that, where the story is what it's focused around, the characters and developing all that, as opposed to just having a whole bunch of spots where, oh, don't forget about this and don't forget about that. And here's an X-Wing, here's money, and so it just felt very real. Like they focused on, here's the story and here's how it fits into the wider universe. And it was cool in that too, because we're still in the era that it's set in there, just post Return of the Jedi. You're still exploring a bit about what the universe or the galaxy is like post Empire, post the fall of the Empire. And so it's really cool to continue to explore all of that. And I imagine we'll see some elements of this all cross over into The Mandalorian at some point down the road too.
Yeah, it's a good time to be a Star Wars fan, I feel. I feel
great.
There's a lot of, non-love for a lot of what Disney's doing online, but I feel people were looking for excuses to say these things.
It's always, there's always going to be the detractors. And sometimes online it becomes a bit of an echo chamber for these individuals to praise or criticize these things. But I'm a firm believer, and if it makes you happy, just do it. As long as it's not hurting anyone else, by all means, like, love the Star Wars you love. And, and I'm also a firm believer in, you don't need to tell everybody the things that you don't like either. That, you don't need to shout it. I didn't love The Acolyte, and, I mentioned a few times on my podcast, which is a forum for that, but I'm not going online and tearing this thing down. Like, some people really liked it. Hey, if you really liked it, I love that. Like, just enjoy the things that you enjoy.
No, 100%. And speaking of enjoying the things that we enjoy, I'm enjoying the answer so far. So let's move happily on to question number 3. Okay, I've never seen this one come up before, so this is cool. This is the first. Nice. Tim, question number 3. If you, and this can be first, last, or both, if you had to change your name, what would you change it to?
What a question. If you had to change your name, what would you change it to? It's funny because I've never really been one of those guys that like, I wish my name was like something cool or whatever. But I really like my name, Tim. I like that it can be short. My actual legal name is Timothy, which I've literally never gone by. Friends call me Timmy sometimes, which I really like. It's kind of a nostalgic thing for me, but Tim is, of course, what I go by. What would I change it to? Jeez, I don't know. Like, I'd probably have to throw it back to if I was forced to change my name, I'd probably have to go. And this, again, most of my answers come back to pop culture here. I'd probably have to go with something like Marty McFly from that. Like, I've always loved, especially the first 2 movies. My dad and I grew up watching them. Then was never like a pop culture guy, never like really into Star Wars and all that. But like Back to the Future was something that he absolutely loved. And by extension of his love, him and I get to watch it all the time. And sometimes even we'll go back and forth and text random lines from Back to the Future and all that. And so I'd have to say Marty would probably be one of the ones I'd go to, because I always have this thing in my mind about this like young guy, this guy that had this perception of who he was, and he just kind of ran with that. And I always liked that element of Marty McFly. And I always just thought it was a cool name. It's just very like easy off the tongue. Yeah, so that's probably what I'd have to go with, Marty. And I'd be just purely based. And I think any name were to choose. I don't know. I was thinking like Luke or maybe something like that. It'd definitely it'd have to invoke some level of pop culture to me, where I'd change and be like, oh, that's why. Funny enough, we debated for a long time naming my first daughter Leia, but we never did, because my biggest fear people would accuse me of naming her after a prominent Star Wars character.
And that's always the worry, right? I mean, our son, we've got two kids, boy and a girl. Our son's 14. Our daughter turns, grief, teenager tomorrow, 13 tomorrow.
Wow.
Fun times. But my son is called Ewan McGregor Brown. And that's because
awesome.
my wife. Yeah, well, my wife, she's Canadian, and when we met, she always said, and I knew this anyway before we got together as a couple of while, because we met online on a band website. Long story for another time. But she always said, if we ever hook up and we get married, blah blah blah, and we have kids, and we have a boy, he's got to be called Ewan McGregor. There's no deal. There's no other name. That's the name.
Did you get
Ewan
down
McGregor.
on one knee right there and propose?
Almost. But she was taking it from Ewan McGregor's side as opposed to the Star Wars side. So, it was more about this good-looking Scottish guy as opposed to this grizzled Scottish guy that she's married to. So, yeah, I hear you. And anytime, not so much here, but anytime we're speaking to people back in the UK or Star Wars or, Star Wars fans and that, and you say Ewan McGregor's like, is that because it's Ben Kenobi and all that kind of stuff? So,
you know what's, you said that, and I don't see Ewan McGregor's anything other than Obi-Wan Kenobi. Like, he's got this like huge filmography of amazing films, Trainspotting and all that. But like, as soon as you said that, I was like, oh, Obi-Wan Kenobi, basically.
Well, and that's it, right? So I completely get it. And now you've got a younger kid now that was only born 2-3 years ago.
Oh, no, I got two girls, one that's 10, one that's 6.
Oh, okay. Are they into the Star Wars and the nerd stuff as well? Or?
Yes and no, a little bit. I'd say my older one, they enjoyed The Force Awakens. My oldest really loved Rey, and that was kind of a real awakening point for me, no pun intended with Force Awakens, but of seeing her connect to a character that she kind of projected herself into, being a female Star Wars character and all that kind of stuff. So I really loved seeing that. And I would say not really, but we just finished the Harry Potter stuff, and they absolutely loved it. They loved all of it. My oldest is a big reader, and so she's going to start the books here. But I haven't really got super deep into Star Wars with them or Marvel or anything like that. But my youngest likes the toys that I have. Like, I have all these old vintage toys in my room here and all that. And so I had to get a whole bunch of extras and put them in a bin. So when she comes in here, she can play with those and she doesn't get up against the glass cases and all that. That was for when she's a little younger, but she still enjoys it. And they have this really cool connection through this stuff through me. And so even for Christmas this year, my oldest for the first time went out with her own money and bought Christmas gifts for myself and wife and that. And she bought me a Hulk Lego. And so she loves the stuff because she knows how much it means to me, which is a really cool thing to see as they're growing up, and they can reflect and look at things that are important to other people and say, I know what will make him happy. It's this Marvel thing or Star Wars thing. And so they don't, it's not that they don't like it. It's just, they're really not into it. They don't have an affinity for it the same way I do. But at the same time, for me, growing up, I was a Ninja Turtle kid, Ghostbusters and all that, Jurassic Park. I didn't find Star Wars until I was probably 13, 14. It hasn't been a lifelong thing for me. It wasn't until 97, 98 when the special editions and the re-releases and all that came out that I really got into Star Wars, and then with the Phantom Menace in 99. So I was quite a bit older when I first found Star Wars. So I'm holding out hope there for them finding Star Wars a little later in life.
Well, you never know. I mean, obviously you've got Star Wars Galaxy Edge coming up.
Yes.
That could be the catalyst right there. And if there's going to be a catalyst, what better place to do it, right?
Absolutely.
And she'll get to meet Rey, which is awesome.
You'll get to meet Rey and have some fun with Kylo and hopefully get on some of those rides. And then we'll come out and be like, all right, let's go make the $400 lightsaber.
Nice. Hey there, Danny here. This podcast will forever be free to listen to. But if you enjoy 5 Random Questions and get value from the show and want to support it, you can do that with a donation of your choosing over at 5randomquestions.com/support. And thanks so much for supporting the show. Now, back to this week's episode. Well, speaking of 400, it's not 400, it's 4, because it's time for question number 4. Okay, good question for a Canadian, I guess, maybe. Question number 4, Tim. Pancakes or waffles?
Pancakes or waffles? I'm going to go from the hip here. Pancakes is where I'm going to sit. But waffles have been something that's coming back to my house recently. So I like to contextualize things. You can tell that I'm a podcaster, that I always like to draw these things out a little bit. But so every Sunday since my oldest could eat solid food, we have made chocolate chip pancakes in our house. And so it's become this tradition. And even so much so now that when my wife's grandma comes, she's going to be 95 this year.
Ooh.
She requests pancakes on Sundays when she's here visiting. And so it's become a big thing in my house. And we switch them up. Sometimes we throw bananas in them and cinnamon and all that. But recently, there's been a much more of a push towards waffles. We got a waffle maker and we're at some friend's house. It's the same batter we use, so it's like no different in taste, but the texture's a little different. So I'm going to say, well, I have to say pancakes because it's such an important part of my life, but waffles are creeping into my household.
And you think, because I found out when I've traveled to the US, it's more waffles that are like on the breakfast menus as opposed. The pancakes are there, but I feel it is very much a sort of north-south divide when it comes to pancakes or waffles. And I know my kids love both, but if they want a pick, I think my son would probably take pancakes and my daughter would be a waffle person. So that's like a random, thing. But yeah, it's interesting how some things are different just based on location. Like I go to the US and one of the big dishes there, I have no idea why, but waffles and fried chicken. You had that?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I've had that. And it might be going back to that Houston experience. But I've never fried chicken in the morning, just not for me. And I know that do you remember like the McGriddle they had here for a while, which was
vaguely,
like,
I
think it was like pancakes or something like that surrounding it. Or maybe I can't remember. Anyways, it was something like that. And so it is odd when, for me, breakfast food is like pancakes, waffles, bacon, eggs, these type of things. And so like, I've never really got even like steak into some people eat steak and eggs, just not for me. But pancakes is to me a tried and tested breakfast side. And I'd say anytime we go out to a breakfast joint, greasy spoon type thing, someone gets pancakes, even on the side. And I'm a big fan of like the peanut butter on them. My oldest puts Nutella with syrup on them. And I grew up in Ontario too. And so we used to get like proper maple syrup. Like we used to go and like drill a hole and tap them and put the bucket on it and it drip out for a couple of days. And you go and you sit and boil it forever in a bush somewhere, and then you'd make these little things of maple syrup. And so I grew up having pancakes with proper maple syrup, like stuff that we actually harvested ourselves, which is really cool too.
Our neighbour, it's funny you mention that. So if I look at my window here about, 150 feet that way or whatever it is, our neighbour over there's got a couple of maple trees, and each year he'll go out there, get them tapped up, and he'll go around the neighbourhood and just have for everybody like a jar of maple syrup when it's all ready. But maple syrup and Nutella, what's going on there?
I don't know. Just a lot of sugar would be my guess. Sometimes it's peanut butter and maple syrup. Sometimes it's Nutella and maple syrup. I just think she's got a bit of a sweet tooth in the morning. It's the only time we let her have that volume of sugar. And so she takes very much full advantage of it.
Send her off to school. Okay, teacher, it's all on you now.
Yeah, here you go.
Perfect. And for pancakes, do you have a mix or do you do it all from scratch? Do you like get the box or all from scratch?
Oh, I'm a box guy. I'm a box, mix it with water. I don't even like the ones that you mix it with an egg. Like that's way too high of a barrier for entry for Sunday morning. So it's just in with the whisk in with some water. I don't measure anything. I just throw a bunch in and get to the consistency I like. And I'm a big giant pancake maker. I'm not small ones. And so when I make them, I'll have a whole batter mix and probably make 3 or 4 pancakes, but like they're size bigger than your head. And so, and the volume of chocolate chips varies by person in the house. My wife likes a little more, little one likes a little less. I usually do no chocolate chips for me, but then I do the peanut butter on top. And so that absolutely box for me.
Well, I feel at this year's PodSummit, that should be on the breakfast every morning.
Yes.
Tim's pancakes.
I'm going to get up extra early and make them for you guys. Chocolate chip pancakes.
Okay, yeah, out of here. I'm going to share this with all attendees. And we'll get on out of it. All right, Tim, we've almost reached the end, bud. This has been really good. So let's see what comes up for the final question. Okay, good question again for a pop culture person. Tim, question number 5. What's the worst movie you've ever seen?
Oh, I had this conversation not too long ago with some friends on another podcast, and I said, have you ever gotten up, like went to a movie theater, paid $20 to get in, gotten up and left because it was just so horrendous? And quite a few of them had said, yes, I've gotten up, I've left, X, Y, and Z movie. And I say, I've never left a film just feeling disgusted that I had watched it, that I had like wasted my time. I'm never going to get that 2 hours back. I just hated this thing for everything that it was. So I've never had that experience where I just had this visceral hate towards a movie. But I'll maybe shift this a little bit. It's not the worst movie I've ever seen. There's two here maybe that I'll talk about. I really, really didn't like Batman vs. Superman when it came out in 2016. Some of that is tainted by the Marvel versus DC stuff that was happening then. But I just found that movie was just so far off the mark that it just never resonated with myself. I didn't love the direction they took Batman, the direction they took Superman, the sprint towards creating a universe that just wasn't necessary at the time. And so like that's the first movie when it comes to mind when I'm just like, I just don't understand what the ethos was behind that movie other than kind of the race to the Justice League. DC at that time were so far behind Marvel and they just needed to go slow and they kind of went really fast. And so I can honestly say it's one movie that I have seen. I've seen once. The re-release that they did, the Zack Snyder cut, was substantially better than that release in the pandemic. It was a much better, much more well-constructed film. But at the same time, it was just one of those movies I'm just like, it's just not for me. And that's cool. Like that's one of those movies, okay, it just wasn't for me. The only other movie that comes directly to mind, if I'm kind of going from the hip here, and this is an interesting one from the Star Wars space, is that I still have this is probably the only time I've ever sat in a movie theater and just had like this reaction where I was just like this gut-wrenching reaction. And it was The Last Jedi when Luke gets that lightsaber and throws it over his shoulder. I would have to say that is, I would say, maybe say it was probably the worst scene in the history of Star Wars. And part of it being is that I love The Force Awakens. They hand him the lightsaber. Like Luke was like top build, or Mark Hamill was like top build in The Force Awakens, not in the movie. And he shows up right at the end. He's old, bearded, still got all the Jedi garb on. Rey hands him this lightsaber. And we wait for 2 years to get the resolution of that scene. And it's played off as some goofy throw over the shoulder, whether it was like, bucking expectations. And that was kind of the first instance of, saying, hey, audience, you're not going to get what you think you're going to get. I hated that scene. I'm not like, I don't mind the movie, and I'm not a hater really of any movies, but that scene, that still to this day, I remember sitting in the theater and being so disappointed with the resolution of like 24 months of waiting for that. And it didn't help too that I spent 24 months speculating and watching trailers on the podcast and all that kind of stuff. And so, for someone that saw the movie, didn't think about it until the next movie came out, I'm sure it was fine. But for me, we spent literally 24 months heavily embedded in Star Wars communities, trying to figure out what the Last Jedi was going to be. I have to say that was probably one that I was like, oof, just not for me, man. That scene in particular probably makes that one of the movies inside of the space that I just not for me.
It's definitely one of the most divisive Star Wars films. Probably the most, not one of. I think it's probably the most divisive because, like you say, the treatment of Luke and his story and where it ended up. And I don't know. I watched one and like The Last Jedi is probably way down there as one of my least favorites. Probably 8. Probably 7, 8, something like that is our position. And I think it was because of the way it opens, like that slapstick, a prank phone call kind of thing. Yeah. With Poe and, the admiral guy or the captain guy in the ship. And I thought, okay. And then you've got Mary Poppins flying through space. Or Leia
yes.
So yeah, I get it. And yeah, that was just like that scene. I know I see a lot of people online. I mean, the history of that lightsaber, that's his father's lightsaber.
Yeah.
It's like Ben saved it for him and protected it for him and, handed it off, knowing the history of the person that was behind that saber and everything, and then just to toss it away, it was like you say, maybe that was like what's his name? The movie?
Rian Johnson.
Maybe that's his way of putting his stamp on it right from the off.
And I think that was it. I think that was set your expectations. This is not going to be what you think it's going to be. And I'm taking this a new and different direction. And he did, he wanted to change things up inside of that universe. He had a story that he thought would resonate, and he wanted to take it in some direction that for some people, myself, it didn't really resonate with. And that they're still trying to course correct from all of that with the movies, because they've still never really recovered from that. And then the Rise of Skywalker and Solo and all that stuff. And they still yet to put, like, since 2019, haven't put a big screen Star Wars film to an audience. And, they spent a lot of time on Disney Plus and doing everything they can there. But that is a catalyst moment for what we're kind of getting now. And like, I would say guys like Favreau and Filoni that are constructing the Mandalorian side of things, Ahsoka and all that, Filoni was the protege of George Lucas. And so there's a lot of, I think for me at least, there's a lot of hope in Star Wars right now about the direction it's going. But I think that in particular is a catalyst moment for where we are right now.
Yeah, I always feel sorry for the Solo movie. I thought that was a fun, enjoyable movie. I thought Aaron nailed the Solo character. Mm-hmm. All the actors nailed their roles perfectly, and I thought it was just like a good, fun, swashbuckling adventure. Yeah. But unfortunately, it came out just after Last Jedi, or a year after. It was the first movie after Last Jedi, and the backlash, maybe even 6 months actually. Who knows?
Yeah, they did a weird thing where it was almost like Disney was trying to amp up like a quarterly financial report, and they shoved it in like a weird time frame and didn't give it the time to breathe from Last Jedi. And it came out, I want to say like April or something weird. It very outside of the May, or they had been releasing everything in December. And so they kind of fell into this weird space. And actually Bob Iger, who's the CEO of Disney, said later on that was his fault. Like, he shoved it to come out earlier and to fit a window and all that stuff. And he said that was a mistake.
Yeah, it'd be nice to see them get maybe a TV show on Disney Plus, bring these characters back and just.
They're talking about a Lando one. Like, Donald Glover is meant to either have a Disney Plus show or a film at some point, and so we'll see.
We can hope, a new hope. There we go. That is a little Easter egg there. So, Tim, we've reached the end of the 5 random questions, and I really appreciate you sharing your answers off the cuff and from the hip. As is only fair, this is the part of the episode, the part of the show where I've had you on the spot for the last, let's say, 40 minutes or so. So it's only fair that I hand over the question and reins to you, good sir.
Awesome. Well, I've been looking forward to this part. And it's funny because I thought of a question there, and the I don't know if just as a random question generator, if it picked up a little bit on what we're talking about, but it was very much framed around pop culture, which I thought was really cool. So I got to talk about a lot of stuff that I love. And so the question actually fits really nicely into what we've been talking about here. And so I always like to ask people about what's the, and it's not just dissimilar from the worst movie thing, but not really. What's the one movie that you are embarrassed to tell people you have not seen?
That I've not seen. I mean, I can mention a whole bunch of TV shows, like Game of Thrones and the not Goodfellas, the Sopranos, that kind of stuff. Okay, so let's huge movie that everybody's seen.
Huge movies. For instance, like I've never seen The Godfather or Scarface.
Okay, yep.
So like those are movies that when people are like, oh, top 10 movies of all time, and not concentrating in the pop culture space. Oh, Godfather's in there, Godfather Part 2. I've never seen any of those movies. And it's almost like, am I allowed to say that? Like I say I'm a pop culture commentator, but I haven't seen some of the like most praised movies of all time.
I would probably say I've seen little clips of it, but Apocalypse Now.
Oh.
Because obviously that was a huge move of its time. Mm-hmm. And I was probably not of age to see it, because I was like, when that came out, what was that, 74, 75 maybe? I think it was the early 70s. So I was alive then, but I was just a young boy. I'm not that old. But I've had opportunities to see it, since then. And I've watched many other movies based in Vietnam. So, I've watched Platoon and Hamburger Hill and all that stuff, but never seen, I guess, the granddaddy of them all, Apocalypse Now. And I feel maybe I've missed out there because, like, the actors that are in that, the director that made it, all that. But I don't know if it's a good movie or not. Yeah, so I don't want to spoil the fact that I've heard so many great things about it and it's a classic. And then I go in and watch and think, I went to see, when we go back to the movies we didn't enjoy, I went to see Blair Witch Project. And I was still in the UK at the time. And maybe it's like a a location thing where it's more suited for North American audience because they know the legend behind why that guy was standing facing the corner at the end and stuff like that. I just found it was so hyped to be super scary. I went to watch it with my girlfriend at the time. We walked out and thought, what the did we just watch? So, but yeah, I would say probably Apocalypse Now. That would be my one.
Awesome. Well, you should check it out one day. That's one of the ones I absolutely seen, and it's definitely of the time, but I think it does stand. Like in some of the shots from that are like classic shots, like the coming out over the horizon with the helicopters and all that stuff too. And again, like a very like American like film, but at the same time, yeah, it's one of those classics that sit up there on lists. You know, you up against like Shawshank Redemption and these type of movies that they kind of sit there. But it's always great because when I had asked my wife, who was my girlfriend at the time, that question when we first started dating, top of her list was Star Wars. Yeah.
And you married her. Good for you.
Well, we had to get through Star Wars first before I proposed. But she's embraced who I am and has very much, I think from even like a gift perspective, really kind of leaned into the Star Wars aspect of it. So she gets it.
So Tim, I really enjoyed chatting with you, bud. And as a fellow nerd pop culture aficionado, I've super enjoyed chatting to you because we've been able to talk about some of this stuff. For anybody that wants to listen to your podcast, any one of the 450 plus episodes you've now got on there, find out more about PodSummit. Maybe they're interested in coming over to Canada and Calgary, later this year. Where can people find all that good stuff and connect with you online?
Absolutely. And Danny, I really appreciate you having me on here. And we've got to podcast a few times together, and it's always a pleasure. We even got to do, it's very unusual these days, but we got to do a live podcast for the first time together, which was awesome. Sitting there in front of a crowd of people talking about podcasting, which was incredible. And doing this now is just been great. And I really appreciate it. If you want to find me talking about pop culture with a slew of different people, you can find that. Just type in the Nerd Room podcast in whatever podcast player that you use. You can go to the nerdroom.net and you can find that. I guess just some of the stuff on our Instagram, I kind of share some of the stuff that I'm doing, my collecting and all that at the Nerd RM there. And if you're interested in podcasting, like we mentioned at this top here, we do this awesome event called PodSummit YYC 2025 is happening this year, September 19th to 20th, right here in Calgary, Alberta, Canada. And if you just go over to podsummit.com, you can find everything there, or follow us at kind of anywhere, but primarily Instagram, over at PodSummit there. So if you have any desire to learn about podcasting, you don't have to be a pro or nothing like that. We kind of made this space for everyone. Give me a ring and we can chat about it.
And if there's any listeners that are in Houston that are podcasters too and want to travel out to Calgary to pick a bone or two with Tim, that's the way to do it. So I will leave all the links to those in the show notes as usual. So if you listen on your favourite podcast app or even online at the 5 Random Questions website, that will be in the show notes. So be sure to check them out as well. So again, Tim, thanks so much for appearing today on 5 Random Questions.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to 5 Random Questions. If you enjoyed this week's episode, be sure to follow for free on the app you're currently listening on or online at 5randomquestions.com. And if you know someone else that would enjoy the show, I'd love for you to recommend it to them. Until the next time, keep asking those questions.